Hollywood needed a joke, and Jim Stafford was the perfect punchline. They packaged him, they sold him, and they prepared to throw him away like every joke before. What they never realized was that the joke was on them. He wasn't a clown. He was a con man wearing a clown's mask. He let them laugh all the way to the bank, while he quietly slipped out the back door and built an empire of his own. This isn't the story of a washed-up star who found himself again. This is the story of Hollywood's greatest con, and of how one man weaponized stupidity into his ultimate weapon. The strangest part is that to truly understand this story of modern deception and the enduring magic of Jim Stafford's music, you must peel back the layers of time to its source, a place of profound innocence that now exists only in memory and sepia-toned photographs. You must go to the heart of Florida, but not the Florida of today, not the sprawling, sun-bleached metropolis of theme parks, interstate highways, and glittering coastal resorts. You have to travel back to the years just after the Second World War to a central Florida that was quieter, wilder, and steeped in a distinct, almost mystical southern atmosphere. This was a land defined not by concrete, but by water and wood, a landscape dominated by the sweet, heavy perfume of orange blossoms drifting from the boundless citrus groves, and the shimmering hypnotic heat rising from countless freshwater lakes that dotted the terrain like scattered pieces of a broken mirror. This was a world of small agricultural towns where life moved at the gentle, unhurried pace of the seasons, dictated by the cycles of planting and harvest. It was a place where stories were told on front porches in the gathering dusk, where the chirping of crickets was the evening's orchestra, and where the humid, languid air itself seemed to carry the echoes of old folk tales and gospel hymns. It was into this very world, in the small, unassuming town of Winter Haven, on the 16th of January, 1944, that James Wayne Stafford was born. To say he was a product of his environment would be an understatement. He was a pure distillation of it. Winter Haven, nestled in the heart of Polk County, was the epicenter of Florida's booming citrus industry. The town's identity was inextricably linked to the rows upon rows of orange, grapefruit, and tangerine trees that stretched to the horizon in every direction. The rhythm of life was the rhythm of the groves. Jim's father was a man whose hands were a testament to this life. They were calloused and strong, shaped by years of hard labor in the citrus industry, managing groves and packing houses. But those same hands, when the workday was done, possessed a surprising grace. In the evenings, he would pick up his banjo, and his fingers, which had spent the day wrestling with the earth, would dance across the fretboard, coaxing out the lively, melancholic, and deeply American melodies of the country and bluegrass music he loved. He wasn't a professional musician. He was something far more fundamental to the culture, a practitioner of a living folk tradition, playing for family and neighbors at local jam sessions and community gatherings. This was music not as a commodity, but as a form of communion. Jim's mother provided the other crucial half of his musical inheritance. Her voice, clear and soulful, filled their modest home and the pews of the local Methodist church with the powerful sound of gospel singing. For his mother, music was an expression of faith, a direct line to the divine, a way to articulate hope, sorrow, and redemption. Music in the Stafford household was not a performance. It was a conversation. His father's banjo spoke the secular language of the soil, of hardship and Saturday night joy. His mother's voice spoke the sacred language of the Spirit, of redemption and Sunday morning faith. And Jim Stafford grew up perfectly bilingual, fluent in both. Long before he ever touched an instrument, Jim was marinating in a rich sonic stew of secular and sacred Southern sounds. The heroes of the era crackled through the family's Magnavox radio, their voices traveling across the peninsula from the powerful signal of WFLA out of Tampa. He heard the lonesome, haunting yodel of Jimmy Rogers, the singing brakeman, whose songs were dusty portraits of rambling men and lost love. He absorbed the heartbreaking poetry and raw, unvarnished emotion of Hank Williams, whose voice seemed to contain all the pain and beauty of the rural Southern experience. These weren't just songs to the young boy, they were transmissions from a larger world, stories that resonated with the landscapes and people he saw around him every day. They became the foundational texts of his artistic education, the soundtrack to his childhood. While other boys in Winter Haven were chasing fly balls on dusty baseball diamonds or casting fishing lines into the tannin-stained waters of Lake Howard, a young Jim Stafford was embarking on a solitary, almost obsessive journey of musical discovery. His was not a formal education guided by stern instructors and structured lesson plans. He had no conservatory training or expensive custom-made instruments. What he possessed was something far more potent, a preternaturally gifted ear, an insatiable, relentless curiosity, and an intuitive feel for the soul of a song. His learning was a process of pure absorption, a deep, almost spiritual communion with the music that surrounded him. He would listen intently to a record or a radio broadcast, his mind deconstructing the melodies, harmonies, and rhythms, and then his fingers would tirelessly work to replicate them. He started on an old second-hand guitar, its wood scarred with the stories of previous owners. He spent countless hours in his room, his fingers growing sore as he painstakingly taught them to form the chords and pick the melodies he heard in his head. His public debut was the stuff of local legend. At just 10 years old, a small skinny boy with a disproportionately large guitar strapped over his shoulder, he stepped onto the stage of the Winter Haven High School auditorium for a talent show. The air was thick with the nervous energy of amateur performers and the polite anticipation of a hometown crowd. But when Jim began to play and sing, a hush fell over the room. The song he had chosen was Hank Williams's classic, Your Cheatin' Heart. For a 10-year-old to sing a song of such profound adult heartbreak and betrayal was, in itself, a startling choice. But it was the delivery that was truly astonishing. He didn't just mimic the words, he channeled the song's deep well of emotion with a conviction and understanding that seemed impossible for a child. He didn't just win first place that night, he found his true home. The stage was not a place of fear, but of belonging. He had discovered the electrifying connection between a performer and an audience, the magic of holding a room captive with nothing but a wooden box, 6 steel strings, and a story to tell. That performance was an awakening. From that point on, his musical appetite became voracious. After the guitar came the banjo, the instrument of his father, its bright syncopated twang connecting him to the Appalachian roots of country music. Then came the fiddle, its mournful cry and lively dance tunes demanding a different kind of discipline. He picked up the mandolin, the harmonica, and the bass. Each new instrument was a new language to learn, a new dialect for his storytelling, and he devoured them all with a quiet, ferocious determination. He wasn't just learning to play notes, he was building an arsenal of sonic colors with which he could paint his musical pictures. He was becoming a multi-instrumentalist, not as a gimmick, but out of a deep-seated need to fully express the complex sounds he heard in his imagination. During these formative years, another crucial element of his future persona was being forged. His voice, not just as a singer but as a storyteller. He spoke with a distinctive rural Florida drawl, a gentle, unhurried cadence that was the authentic accent of his home. Among some of his schoolmates, this way of speaking was a source of mild teasing, a marker of being a country boy. Yet, what was once a cause for a flicker of youthful self-consciousness would soon become one of his greatest and most endearing assets. That unpretentious, folksy delivery would become his vocal signature, lending an air of absolute authenticity, gentle self-deprecation, and down-home charm to every song, every joke, and every story he would one day share with the world. It was the voice of the world he came from, and it was a voice that people would come to trust and love. By the time he was a teenager, the solitary prodigy was ready to move his music out of the bedroom and into the world. The explosion of rock and roll had swept the nation, and even in the quiet towns of Central Florida, its energy was palpable. Jim and a few like-minded, musically gifted friends, boys who also felt the pull of something more than the 9-to-5 life that awaited them, formed a band. They called themselves the Legends. In retrospect, the name seems almost laughably prophetic, an accidental piece of cosmic foreshadowing. This unassuming high school group playing for pocket money at local sock hops, community fairs, and teen dances contained a truly astonishing concentration of future musical talent. Alongside Jim, who served as the band's charismatic frontman, lead vocalist, and multi-instrumental wizard, was a gifted and introspective songwriter named Kent Lavoie. The world would later come to know him by his stage name, Lobo, the creator of gentle, melodic pop hits like Me and You and A Dog Named Boo that would sell millions of records around the globe. And also, part of this vibrant local music scene was another quiet, intense young man with a visionary musical mind and a lineage tied to the citrus wealth of the region, Graham Parsons. While not an official member of the Legends, he was a key contemporary who shared stages and musical ideas with the group. This was the same Graham Parsons who would go on to become one of the most revered and influential figures in the history of American music, the brilliant, tragic architect of country rock, a guiding light for artists like the Byrds, the Flying Burrito Brothers, and Emmylou Harris. It was a collision of destinies, a musical super collider hidden in a Florida swamp. In one small high school band, the three great streams of American music were converging: Stafford, the populist country storyteller, Lobo, the gentle folk pop melodist, and Parsons, the visionary alchemist of cosmic American music. They were not just a band, they were a laboratory for the next 2 decades of sound. They were learning how to work a crowd, how to blend their instruments, how to harmonize. They were also inevitably experiencing the creative friction that arises when powerful artistic visions collide. There were the typical teenage band squabbles over girls and gear, but the more profound disagreements were about musical direction. Parsons, even then, was a musical alchemist, instinctively pushing towards a synthesis of sounds. He was drawn to the raw energy of rock and roll, the deep soul of R&B, and the storytelling traditions of country. He wanted to break down the barriers between genres. Stafford's heart, however, remained firmly and proudly rooted in the country storytelling tradition of his heroes. He admired the craft, the precision, and the narrative clarity of the music he grew up with. He was a populist entertainer in the making, while Parsons was a budding avant-garde visionary. This creative tension, this push and pull between tradition and innovation, was an invaluable education for everyone involved. It forced them to articulate and defend their musical philosophies, to understand not just what they wanted to play, but why. For Jim, the experience was a crucial bridge. It taught him how to take his solitary virtuosity and make it part of a collaborative whole. It honed his ability to connect with people from the stage, helping him develop the relaxed, aw shucks country boy persona that was both completely genuine and a masterful piece of showmanship. He was the friendly, grinning prodigy who just happened to be a world-class musician. After graduating from Winter Haven High School in 1960, the crossroads that every young person faces loomed large. The conventional paths were clear and well-trodden. Follow his father into the citrus business, join the military, or perhaps enroll in a local college. But for Jim Stafford, there was really only one choice. His future was not in the geometric rows of the orange groves or behind a desk. His destiny lay on a stage under the warm glow of the lights, with an instrument in his hands and a story on his lips. He had served his apprenticeship in the heart of Florida, his musical identity now fully formed, a unique blend of instrumental brilliance, narrative wit, and deep-rooted Southern charm. The long, uncertain, and often frustrating road to Nashville lay ahead, but the boy from Winter Haven was ready to walk it. He was a virtuoso born of the swamp, and he was about to show the world what that sounded like. But the road from the swamps of Florida to the heart of the music industry was long, uncertain, and paved with rejection. The dawn of the 1960s was a period of explosive, near-seismic upheaval in the landscape of American popular music. For a young, ambitious multi-instrumentalist from the quiet citrus groves of rural Florida, a man whose unique artistic identity had been forged in the crucible of gospel hymns, Hank Williams's Heartbreak, and swampy folktales, the path forward was anything but clear. The decade following his high school graduation would become a long, often frustrating, and deeply formative period of paying his dues. It was a time spent in the trenches of the music business, a decade-long odyssey through the smoky bars, noisy clubs, and lonely highways of the South, where the boy from Winter Haven was tempered into a seasoned entertainer, his resilience tested to its absolute limits. Armed with a boundless well of talent and the naive optimism of youth, Jim Stafford initially followed the well-trodden path of countless aspiring musicians before him. He packed his instruments and his dreams and aimed them squarely at the heart of the country music universe, Nashville, Tennessee. In the early 1960s, Nashville's Music Row was more than just a place. It was an institution, a fortress, whose towering walls were guarded by powerful record executives, savvy producers, and a rigid, unyielding aesthetic. The prevailing sound of the era was the Nashville sound, a polished, sophisticated style of country music designed to cross over to pop audiences. It was characterized by smooth, crooning vocals, lush string arrangements, and angelic backing choirs. Producers like Chet Atkins and Owen Bradley were the architects of this sound, and they had transformed country music from a regional rustic art form into a slick commercial powerhouse. They were looking for the next Patsy Cline, the next Jim Reeves, the next Eddie Arnold. They were not, it turned out, looking for a lanky Floridian who sang quirky, humorous, and sometimes downright spooky songs about the eccentric characters and strange happenings in the backwoods he called home. He sent out countless demo tapes, each one a carefully crafted package of hope. He would spend what little money he had on studio time, meticulously recording his songs, pouring his heart and soul into every performance. He would mail them off to the imposing addresses on Music Row, RCA, Decca, Columbia, and then he would wait. The response, when it came at all, was a resounding and demoralizing silence. More often than not, the tapes simply vanished into a corporate void, unplayed, unacknowledged. The few rejection slips he did receive were terse and impersonal, offering no encouragement, no constructive criticism, just a cold, hard no. The problem was one of categorization, a fundamental disconnect between the product he was selling and what the market was buying. His music was a puzzle the industry gatekeepers couldn't solve. His intricate guitar and banjo picking were pure country, but his lyrics were too eccentric, too narrative-driven, too funny. His storytelling was rooted in a folk tradition, but his arrangements had a pop sensibility. As one record executive, in a rare moment of blunt feedback, bluntly put it, he was too weird for country and too country for pop. The Nashville hit machine was a factory designed to produce either polished chrome or rustic wood. It had no assembly line for a creature made of both, so the machine simply registered error and shut down. He didn't fit neatly into any of their carefully curated boxes, and in the Nashville of the early 1960s, if you didn't fit in a box, you didn't exist. The frustration was immense, a constant gnawing presence. Each rejection was another door slammed in his face. To make ends meet and continue funding his musical ambitions, he became a journeyman performer, a road warrior. He played in any venue that would have him. He led the house band at the Imperial Lakes Country Club in Lakeland, playing standards for well-heeled patrons. He played raucous honky-tonks where he had to sing over the din of bar fights and clinking beer bottles. He played college fraternity parties, VFW halls, and tourist traps along the Florida coast. The sets were long, the pay was meager, and the audiences were often indifferent, more interested in their drinks and conversations than the man on stage. It was a grueling, hand-to-mouth existence. He was living out of a suitcase, driving his old car from one gig to the next, often feeling like he was running in place. Doubt, the insidious enemy of every artist, began to creep in at the edges of his consciousness during the long, lonely drives between towns. Was he crazy to be chasing this impossible dream? Was that record executive right? Was he just too weird? Yet this relentless grind, this decade in the wilderness, was also his university. It was here that he truly learned his craft. He learned how to read a room, how to win over a tough crowd, how to seamlessly blend music with comedy. He learned that a well-timed joke could capture an audience's attention more effectively than a blistering guitar solo. He honed his stage presence, transforming from a mere musician into a true entertainer. He developed an arsenal of stories, anecdotes, and one-liners, weaving them between his songs. He discovered that his greatest asset was his own personality, the aw-shucks, self-deprecating country boy. The persona wasn't an act, it was an amplification of who he truly was, and audiences responded to its authenticity. He was one of them, a regular guy who just happened to be a musical genius. In the mid-1960s, the musical world was turned on its head by the British invasion. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and the Kinks redefined popular music, and the shockwaves were felt even in the staunchest corners of Nashville. The folk revival, spearheaded by artists like Bob Dylan, was also in full swing, emphasizing lyrical depth and social commentary. This new musical tide left Jim feeling even more artistically isolated. He wasn't a rock and roller, and he wasn't a protest singer. He was a storyteller from the swamps, an artist out of time. To supplement his meager income from performing, he took a part-time job that, in a stroke of serendipity, would inadvertently provide a crucial piece of his future success. He became a DJ at a local radio station in Winter Haven. It was here, in the quiet, solitary hours of the broadcast booth, often late at night when the world outside was asleep, that he stumbled upon his own personal creative laboratory. His job was to play records, read the news, and announce the station's call letters. But there was a lot of dead air to fill in between. He began to use that time to practice his storytelling. He would spin yarns for his unseen audience, telling jokes, sharing strange local news, and developing the easy conversational patter that felt like he was talking to a single friend rather than broadcasting to the world. He was learning how to be not just a musician, but a media personality. He was mastering the art of intimacy through a microphone, a skill that would prove invaluable when he finally found himself in front of a television camera. The turning point, the first crack of light after a long dark night, finally came at the dawn of a new decade. The cultural and musical landscape of the early 1970s was beginning to shift once again. The rigid genre boundaries that had defined the previous decade were starting to dissolve. A new wave of Southern artists, a more eclectic and iconoclastic group, was finding mainstream success. There was the wry, funky country of Jerry Reed, whose story songs like Amos Moses had a narrative flair and humor that resonated with Jim's own style. And then there was the astonishing success of his old friend and bandmate from the Legends, Kent Lavoie. Now recording under the name Lobo, he had scored a massive international hit with Me and You and a Dog Named Boo. Lobo's gentle folk pop sound was proof that an artist from Central Florida could reach a global audience without conforming to the Nashville or Los Angeles molds. The door, which had been bolted shut for so long, was finally creaking open. There was a growing appetite for authenticity, for unique voices, for stories that felt real. Sensing this momentous shift, Jim Stafford felt a renewed surge of creative energy. He decided to stop trying to write the songs he thought Nashville wanted to hear, and instead write the song that only he could write. He reached deep into his own past, into the folklore and mythology of the Florida swamps that had been the backdrop of his entire life. He remembered the stories whispered by old-timers, tales of mysterious figures who lived deep in the wetlands, people who existed on the fringes of society, shrouded in legend and fear. From these memories, he began to weave a dark, atmospheric, and deeply weird narrative about a feared and mysterious woman who lived in the swamps near his hometown, a woman named Hattie. The song was called Swamp Witch. It was unlike anything he had ever written before, and it was certainly unlike anything else on the radio. It wasn't a love song or a dance tune. It was a piece of Southern Gothic theater set to music, with its spooky, evocative lyrics and a driving, chugging rhythm that mimicked the sound of a steam engine or a chugging boat. The song was utterly unique. It was compelling, a little bit scary, and impossible to ignore. He knew instinctively that this was it. This was the song that perfectly encapsulated who he was as an artist. He scraped together the money to record a professional-sounding demo, pouring all the lessons of the last decade into the performance. This time, when the demo landed on a desk in Los Angeles, it caught the ear of an executive at MGM Records named Phil Gernhardt, a fellow Floridian who had produced Lobo's hits. Gernhardt understood the culture from which the song sprang. He wasn't bewildered by its strangeness. He was captivated by it. He recognized its raw, authentic power. The phone call came, the one Jim had been waiting for more than a decade. MGM wanted to sign him. In 1973, Swamp Witch was officially released as a single. It wasn't an explosive overnight sensation, it was a slow burn, a word-of-mouth phenomenon. Radio programmers were initially hesitant, unsure of where to place it. But the public responded. Listeners started calling in, requesting that spooky song about the witch in the swamp. The song began its slow, steady climb up the charts. It crawled into the top 40, eventually reaching an impressive number 39 on the Billboard Hot 100. For a debut single by an unknown artist, it was a remarkable achievement. After more than 10 years of struggle, rejection, and relentless perseverance, the long, hard road had finally led somewhere. Jim Stafford, the storyteller from the swamps, had finally arrived. The gates to the kingdom had been breached, not by conforming, but by being defiantly, brilliantly himself. But unlocking a gate is one thing, storming the castle is another. The success of Swamp Witch brought a new and unfamiliar kind of pressure. He was on the clock to prove it wasn't a fluke. He was no longer the anonymous journeyman musician, playing for tips and dreaming of a break. He was now a signed artist on a major label, MGM Records, and he was a commodity. The executives who had once ignored his demo tapes were now looking at him with the calculating eyes of investors who expected a return. A single top 40 hit was a promising start, but in the ruthless calculus of the music business, it could just as easily be a fluke. The unspoken yet deafeningly loud question hanging in the air was, can he do it again? The dreaded specter of the one-hit wonder loomed large, a ghost that haunted the hallways of every record label. Jim knew he was on the clock. The window of opportunity that had cracked open could slam shut just as quickly. He was rushed back into the studio, the atmosphere now charged with a nervous, high-stakes energy that was a world away from the relaxed experimental sessions that had produced Swamp Witch. This time, there were expectations. There were deadlines. There were executives listening to the rough mixes, tapping their feet and stroking their chins. Jim felt the weight of it all. He had spent his entire adult life fighting to get to this exact point, and now that he was here, the fear of losing it all was a palpable thing. He needed another song, but not just any song. He needed a phenomenon. And as is so often the case in the strange alchemy of creative genius, the inspiration for that phenomenon came not from a moment of profound artistic struggle, but from a moment of pure, unadulterated, awkward human reality. The story, which has since become a part of country music folklore, is a masterpiece of comedic failure. To find its roots, one must travel back in time, back to the humid, mosquito-thick evenings of his youth in Florida. Jim, like any young man, was navigating the treacherous waters of dating. He found himself on what he would later describe as a disastrous swamp date, a distinctly Floridian courtship ritual that likely involved a drive down a dark, sandy road with the symphony of the wetlands, croaking frogs, chirping crickets, and the ominous hum of insects, providing the romantic soundtrack. Sitting beside a young woman in the front seat of his car, under the pale moonlight filtering through the Spanish moss, he decided to make his move. He attempted the classic time-honored maneuver known to generations of hopeful young men, the yawn and stretch, a supposedly casual gesture designed to nonchalantly land his arm around his date's shoulders. He yawned with theatrical gusto. He stretched his arm up and back, but in the dim light, his spatial awareness failed him. As his arm came down, his hand, instead of finding her shoulder, landed squarely and directly on a large, hairy spider that had decided to take up residence on the car's upholstery. The young woman's response was not the romantic sigh he had hoped for. It was a blood-curdling shriek of pure terror. The date, for all intents and purposes, was over. The romance was dead on arrival, but in the wreckage of that failed encounter, a creative seed was planted. The juxtaposition of his romantic intentions and her arachnophobic horror was, he realized later, fundamentally hilarious. He filed the memory away, but it resurfaced now, under the pressure to write a hit. The image was just too vivid, too relatable. He teamed up with another brilliant Florida musician and songwriter, David Bellamy, who, along with his brother Howard, would soon form the iconic duo, the Bellamy Brothers. Working together, they began to craft a narrative around this central comedic image. They built a song that was part story, part confession, and all irresistible fun. They named it Spiders and Snakes. Released in late 1973, It was a perfect storm of clever songwriting and cultural timing. The song was an instant earworm, a confection of catchy, jangly guitar riffs, a bouncy rhythm, and Stafford's signature folksy, conversational delivery. The lyrics were a masterclass in simple, effective storytelling, capturing the universal awkwardness of young love with a playful, slightly wicked sense of humor. "I said, I love you," she said. "I know, but I've got to go. My mom is waiting for me." You know, the things she said were not the things I wanted to hear, but I'll have to say them all again, I know, to make it clear. This time, there was no slow burn. Spiders and Snakes was a rocket. It blasted onto the radio airwaves and took over the country. In the America of late 1973 and early 1974, a nation weary from the lingering trauma of the Vietnam War and increasingly cynical amidst the unfolding Watergate scandal, the song was a dose of pure, unadulterated joy. It was escapism in its most perfect form. It was a song you couldn't help but sing along to, a story that made you smile. By January of 1974, it had climbed all the way to the coveted number 3 spot on the Billboard Hot 100, an almost unheard of achievement for such an idiosyncratic song. It was a certified smash hit, selling over 2 million copies, earning Jim Stafford a solid gold record to hang on his wall, and even garnering a prestigious Grammy nomination. In the space of a few short months, the narrative had irrevocably changed. Jim Stafford was no longer a potential one-hit wonder. He was a bona fide superstar, one of the biggest and most unique new voices in American music. The life of the struggling club musician vanished overnight, replaced by a dizzying whirlwind of fame. He was suddenly in demand everywhere. He was flown to Los Angeles to appear on the most influential television shows of the day, making appearances on The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson, the ultimate seal of approval in American entertainment. He traded jokes with the king of late night, his easygoing country boy charm, translating perfectly to the small screen. He appeared on music programs like American Bandstand and The Midnight Special, performing for millions of viewers. His face, once known only to the patrons of Florida bars, was now instantly recognizable across the nation. With the pressure to deliver a hit now replaced by the even more intense pressure to sustain the momentum, Jim proved that his creative well was far from dry. He followed up his chart-topping smash with My Girl Bill, another brilliantly crafted story song that showcased his cleverness as a writer. The song tells the tale of two men, the narrator and his best friend Bill, and the woman they both love. It unfolds as a heartbreaking story of unrequited love and friendship, leading the listener to believe the narrator has lost the girl to Bill. The genius of the song, however, is revealed in its final, stunning line. "Me and Bill have been friends, you see, all of our lives, and you're the only thing that's ever come between us, and I'm not going to let that happen now, so I'm telling you goodbye. You see, Bill's my best friend and my wife." The surprise twist, revealing that the narrator is a woman talking to her male lover, was a jaw-dropping moment for audiences in 1974. The song became a major pop hit, climbing to number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100 and becoming another million-selling single, cementing his status as a master storyteller and proving that his success was built on more than just novelty. His debut album, self-titled, went platinum. He toured relentlessly, no longer playing to half-empty bars, but to sold-out concert halls and arenas across the country. He even made a triumphant appearance on the hallowed stage of the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, the very institution that had once rejected him. It was a moment of profound poetic vindication. The outsider had not only breached the walls, he was now being celebrated in the fortress's inner sanctum. He capped off this incredible golden run with two more major hits. each one further cementing his unique persona. First came the slyly subversive Wildwood Weed. On the surface, it was a goofy, up-tempo bluegrass number about two brothers, Judd and Slowfoot, who discover a strange plant on their farm. But the lyrics, with their tale of the plant making them act silly and giggle, and the doodly-doo chorus, were a thinly veiled winking ode to marijuana. In the more conservative climate of the mid-70s, it was a remarkably audacious song to get played on mainstream radio, a testament to how cleverly it was written and how much goodwill Stafford had built with the public. It became another top 10 hit. Then came Your Bulldog Drinks Champagne, a hilarious takedown of a snobbish high society woman, further solidifying his image as a down-to-earth country boy observing the strange ways of the rich and famous. The television networks, observing his immense charisma, his natural comedic timing on talk shows, and his massive commercial appeal, took notice. In an era when the television variety show was the absolute zenith of entertainment, Jim Stafford was offered the ultimate prize. In 1975, he was given his own primetime summer replacement series on ABC, The Jim Stafford Show. For its single season, the show was a popular summer series, a delightful mix of his music, comedy sketches that played on his folksy persona, and a dazzling array of A-list guest stars like Dolly Parton, the Pointer Sisters, and Sonny and Cher. Jim Stafford was no longer just a recording artist. He was a beloved household name. His grinning face beamed into millions of American homes every week. He was at the absolute summit of his fame. The view from the top, a dizzying panorama of gold records, television cameras, and adoring fans. The boy from the citrus groves of Winter Haven, the kid who was told he was too weird for country, had conquered the entertainment world on his own quirky, uncompromising terms. He was a genuine superstar. But fame, in the ecosystem of popular culture, is a notoriously fickle beast. As the mid-1970s progressed, the cultural weather patterns were changing with breathtaking speed. A new sound was beginning to rumble in the distance, the hypnotic four-on-the-floor beat of disco, the first tangible sign that the climate had changed for Jim was the fate of his show. As a summer series, its run was short-lived, and it was not renewed. For Jim, it was a significant and public blow. The weekly platform that had made him a star was gone, and the silence from the television studio was deafening. Simultaneously, the world of radio, the engine that had driven his entire career, was retooling itself for the new era. Radio programmers, always chasing the latest trend, began to clear their playlists to make room for the glittering sounds of Donna Summer, the Bee Gees, and Earth, Wind, and Fire. The airwaves that had once been saturated with Spiders and Snakes and My Girl Bill now throbbed with bass lines and synthesizers. Jim's record sales, which had once been measured in the millions, began to dwindle. The man who had been a constant, seemingly permanent presence on the charts now found himself on the outside looking in, struggling to get his new songs played. He was still writing, still recording, still creating the music that was true to his heart, but it felt like he was broadcasting on a frequency that no one was listening to anymore. The industry machine that had so eagerly embraced him was now moving on without him, its gaze fixed on the shimmering light of the disco ball. This precipitous commercial decline was compounded and magnified by a period of intense personal turmoil. The immense, relentless strain of his whirlwind rise to fame had exacted a heavy toll on his personal life. The man the public saw was a perpetually grinning, easygoing entertainer, but behind the scenes, the pressure to maintain that image, to constantly tour, to produce a weekly television show, and to deliver hit after hit had created a pressure cooker environment. This professional decline was compounded by personal turmoil. In 1978, he entered a high-profile marriage with fellow music superstar Bobby Gentry. However, the immense pressures of their careers proved too much, and the marriage was short-lived, ending in divorce in 1980. The stable, grounding force of his family life was gone, leaving him adrift in the often disorienting world of show business. It was a common and tragic pitfall for artists struggling to navigate the dizzying highs and devastating lows of the entertainment industry, a way to numb the sting of a world that had once adored you and now seemed to be ignoring you. Professionally and personally, Jim Stafford was at a crossroads. He was standing in the wreckage of his superstardom, the applause still faintly ringing in his ears, and he was faced with a stark choice. He could chase the trends. He could have hired a producer, put on a polyester suit, and recorded a disco album. Many of his contemporaries tried to make that pivot, often with awkward and career-damaging results. He could have compromised his artistic vision in a desperate attempt to reclaim a spot on the charts. But Jim Stafford was, at his core, the same man he had always been. A storyteller, a comedian, and a virtuoso musician. He had no interest in becoming a disco singer. He knew who he was. His artistic identity was not a costume to be changed with the seasons. It was woven into the very fabric of his being. So he made a conscious decision to step off the roller coaster. Instead of chasing the fleeting attention of the pop charts, he began to refocus his energy on the one thing that had always brought him joy and had never let him down: live performance. He started taking gigs that were less about selling records and more about the pure craft of entertaining. Hiding in the anonymity of the orchestra pit, he simply played his instruments, guitar and banjo, night after night, rediscovering the simple pleasure of making music as part of a larger whole, far from the glare of the spotlight. It was a period of artistic recalibration, of remembering why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. And then in the early 1980s, as he continued to tour the country playing theaters and clubs, he made a decision that would prove to be the most brilliant, consequential, and artistically satisfying of his entire career. He turned his back on the twin capitals of the entertainment industry, Nashville and Hollywood, the very cities he had fought so long to conquer. He set his sights on a small, unassuming town nestled deep in the Ozark Mountains of southern Missouri, Branson. At the time, Branson was not the sprawling entertainment mecca it is today. It was a quiet, family-oriented tourist destination, but it was just beginning its transformation into a unique hub of live country music. Artists like Roy Clark and the Presley family had established successful theaters there, pioneering a new business model for performers. Instead of touring the country to find an audience, they built a home and let the audience come to them. Jim saw the future there. He saw a place where he could escape the relentless, soul-crushing demands of the hit-making machine. He saw a place where he wouldn't be judged by his latest chart position, but by the quality of his live show. He saw a place where he could be his own boss, build his own stage, and cultivate a direct, lasting relationship with his audience. An audience that loved him for who he was, not for who was currently popular. After performing regularly in the city throughout the 1980s, often at his friend Dolly Parton's theater in the nearby Smoky Mountains and other Ozark venues, he saw that the model worked. He saw that there was a massive, loyal audience for the kind of family-friendly music and comedy he excelled at. He was ready to make his ultimate commitment. Instead of chasing fame, he was going to build a kingdom. Throughout the 1980s, he laid the groundwork, becoming a regular and beloved performer in the Ozarks. This decision to abandon the well-trodden paths of Nashville and Hollywood for a quiet, burgeoning town was a radical act of reinvention. It was a gamble placed squarely on himself, and in January 1990, that gamble paid off with the grand opening of the Jim Stafford Theater. This was not a tentative toe-dipping into a new market. It was a full-throated, all-in commitment. He made a significant personal investment, using the capital earned from his years of success to design and construct a state-of-the-art 1,100-seat theater from the ground up. He wasn't merely renting a stage. He was laying a foundation both literally and metaphorically. He was planting a flag. In the precarious world of show business, this move was a profound declaration of independence. By investing his own fortune, he transformed himself from talent into proprietor, the producer, director, and owner. The venture's fate now rested entirely on his shoulders. His show in Branson was a runaway, almost instantaneous success, and the reasons for it were a perfect distillation of his unique journey. He had, through years of trial and error, created a seamless and irresistible blend of his various talents. The show was a masterclass in entertainment, a meticulously crafted experience that appealed to the exact demographic that was now flocking to Branson by the busload. Firstly, there were the hits. For the millions of tourists, primarily middle American families and retirees, his songs were the soundtrack of a cherished past. Hearing Spiders and Snakes, Swamp Witch, and My Girl Bill, performed live by the man who made them famous, was a powerful dose of nostalgia, a warm and comforting link to their own youth. But the show was far more than a simple greatest hits review. It was a dazzling showcase for his often overlooked virtuosity as a musician. Freed from the 3-minute constraints of a pop single, Jim could finally let loose, reminding audiences that beneath the aw-shucks comedian was a world-class instrumentalist. He would mesmerize the crowd with lightning-fast, intricate bluegrass runs on his banjo, play hauntingly beautiful melodies on a classical guitar, and then switch to the fiddle for a foot-stomping hoedown. These were not self-indulgent displays. They were joyous celebrations of American roots music, presented with the infectious enthusiasm of someone who had spent a lifetime mastering his craft. Crucially, the music was expertly woven together with his hilarious, family-friendly comedy. His humor, honed over decades in smoky bars and on primetime television, was gentle, self-deprecating, and deeply relatable. He told stories about his Florida childhood, his misadventures in the music business, and the absurdities of everyday life. He had a unique ability to make a theater of over 1,000 people feel like an intimate living room. His act was clean, clever, and safe for all ages, a key ingredient in the Branson formula. Tourists knew they could bring their children and their grandparents to the Jim Stafford Theater, and everyone would leave with a smile on their face. He was a pioneer in a new form of theatrical variety show, a format that would become the standard for the entire city. His timing was impeccable. He had arrived in Branson at the precise moment the town was exploding into a national phenomenon. In the early 1990s, a feature on the CBS News program 60 Minutes famously dubbed Branson the live music show capital of the world, and the floodgates opened. Tourists from across the country descended on the small Ozark town, eager for the wholesome, star-powered entertainment it promised. Jim Stafford, as one of the first major national stars to build his own custom theater there, was perfectly positioned to ride this massive wave. He wasn't just a part of the Branson boom. He was a key figure who arrived at the perfect time, contributing significantly to the town's growing national profile. His theater became a cornerstone of the entertainment scene, a must-see attraction alongside those of other legends like Andy Williams, Mel Tillis, and Mickey Gilley, who followed his lead. For over 3 decades, the Jim Stafford Theater was a beloved institution, a landmark on Branson's famous Highway 76, also known as the Strip. He performed thousands upon thousands of shows, often 2 a day, 6 days a week for 9 months of the year. It was a grueling schedule, but it was a stable one. It was the life of a dedicated craftsman, not a flighty pop star. He became an elder statesman of country comedy, a living link to a golden age of American entertainment. His professional life found a rhythm and a permanence he had never known during his years of fame. This stability also fostered a personal rebirth. In Branson, he met and married Ann Britt, a talented performer in her own right, who became not only his wife but his creative and business partner. She co-starred in his show, and together they raised their children, Sheffer and Gigi, in the community they now called home. His life was no longer divided between the lonely road and a fractured home life. It was a single, integrated whole. The man who had once felt adrift in the wake of his fame had found a permanent anchor in the heart of the Ozarks. The wider world did not forget him. In 2017, he was officially recognized for his contributions to the arts, being inducted into the Florida Artists Hall of Fame, a fitting tribute to the Florida son, whose stories had always been rooted in the swamps and groves of his home state. In 2000, in a beautiful full-circle moment, he embarked on a successful reunion tour with his old friend and bandmate from the Legends, Lobo, the two Florida boys who had taken wildly different paths, but had both found lasting success on their own terms. There were occasional private struggles, but he always bounced back, his dedication to his audience and his craft unwavering. His work ethic was legendary in a town built on it. As the years went by and the 21st century dawned, his legacy began to be re-evaluated. A new generation, discovering his classic television clips on platforms like YouTube, began to appreciate the depth of his talent with fresh eyes. They saw past the novelty label and recognized the incredible musicianship, the cleverness of the lyrics, and the effortless charisma of the performer. The songs, once dismissed by some critics as mere trifles, were now correctly seen as cleverly crafted masterpieces of American folk storytelling, miniature vignettes of humor and humanity. The kingdom Jim Stafford had built in Branson was more than just a theater. It was a living museum of his artistry, a testament to the enduring power of a unique and authentic American voice. He had transformed himself from a former pop star into a beloved and lasting institution. As of 2025, Jim Stafford, at 81, remains a working artist. Though his landmark Branson Theater closed in 2021, he continues to perform, a living testament to a life dedicated to a joyful craft. His journey offers a powerful counter-narrative to the tragic tales common in the music industry. He is not a forgotten hero, but a master of resilience who experienced dizzying fame and had the wisdom to walk away on his own terms, trading the volatile world of the pop charts for the stable community he built in the Ozarks. To dismiss him as a mere novelty act is to miss the artistry. His songs, from the gothic tale of Swamp Witch to the clever narrative of spiders and snakes, were masterpieces of American folk storytelling built on a foundation of extraordinary musicianship. His genius was making virtuosic talent feel as welcoming as a conversation with an old friend. Ultimately, Jim Stafford's story is a triumphant exception to the industry rule. He took his 15 minutes of fame and skillfully stretched it into a lifetime of meaningful work. His true legacy isn't measured in gold records, but in the laughter he brought to millions and the powerful example he set for artistic independence. He may have sung about spiders and snakes, but his life is a testament to something far more profound: the enduring power of a good song, a good laugh, and the unshakable wisdom of a man who always knew exactly who he was.